Herkese merhabalar. Bugün bu konuşmayı yapıyor olacağımız Adam Nathaniel Furman'la birlikte bugünü düzenleyen Arkitera ailesine ve ASAŞ firmasına teşekkür ediyoruz. Tabii ki her şeyden önce bu konuşmayı yürütecek olan Enilab Podcast kurucusu Nurgül Yardım Meriçliler'in yerine bugün ben sizlerle olmaya çalışacağım. Umuyorum elimizden gelen en iyi sunumu ve bilgi aktarımını gerçekleştireceğiz. Tabii ki bu arada Demet Hanım'a yaptığı sunum için teşekkür ediyoruz. Kendisi ASAŞ Alüminyum Pazarlama, Kurumsal İletişim ve Alüminyum Tasarım Ürünleri Grup Müdürü. Hoş geldiniz Demet Hanım.
Merhabalar Emre Bey, nasılsınız?
Teşekkür ediyorum. Siz nasılsınız?
Ben de iyiyim, teşekkür ederim. Ben bu arada bizi izleyen katılımcılara da çok teşekkür ediyorum bizi izledikleri için. Bugün de biliyorsunuz ASAŞ'ın Trend Renklerinin 2021 yılı versiyonunun tanıtımını gerçekleştiriyor olacağız. Aslında yavaş yavaş sunuma geçebiliriz arzu ederseniz ya da öncesinde sizin eklemek istediğiniz bir konu var mıdır?
Tabii ki aslında bu ASAŞ Alüminyum'un son dönemde son teknolojik donatımlarla beraber yaptığı çalışmaları vesaire hepsini siz özetleyecek olacaksınız zaten ama belki bununla ilgili çok kısa bir şekilde 5 üretim tesisinin ve 2400'den fazla çalışanıyla tüm dünya çapında 6 kıtada 90'dan fazla ülkeye üretim, ihracat yapan bir firma. Tabii ki bu ürünlerinin yanı sıra inşaat, otomotiv, raylı sistem gibi pek çok farklı sektöre de hizmet vermesinin yanı sıra ASAŞ Sanat Üretim Merkezi ile birlikte sanatı ve sanatçıları da destekliyor. Tabii bu bağlamda yaptığınız üretimler de bununla birlikte örtüşüyor. Ben eminim ki sunumunuzda bunların hepsini özetleyecektir.
Çok teşekkür ederim, çok sağ olun. ASAŞ olarak geçen yıl 30. yılımızı kutladık. Sizin de bahsetmiş olduğunuz gibi 6 kıtada 90'dan fazla ülkeye ihracat gerçekleştiriyoruz. Bugün tanıtımını gerçekleştirecek olduğumuz trend renklerimizde de aslında alüminyum kompozit panel de kullanacağımız renkleri tanıtıyoruz. Kompozit panelde de Türkiye'de ilk yerli üretici konumunda ASAŞ Alüminyum. Bu anlamda da öncü ve bir lider rolümüz var. Bunu da pekiştirmek amacıyla sektöre nasıl farklılık ve yenilik getirebiliriz diye bir düşünceyle yola çıkmıştık. Ben isterseniz çok da fazla uzatmadan süreci Adam'la olan güzel sohbete de hızlıca geçebilmek için bizim trend renklerimizin tanıtımına geçebilirim.
Tabii ki teşekkürler.
Çok sağ olun. Teşekkür ederim. Öncelikle şundan bahsetmek istiyorum. Biz 2021 yılında trend renkleri tasarlarken bazı konuları odağımıza almayı hedefledik. Bu anlamda da iki tane konu üzerine odaklandık. Birincisi farklılaşma imkanı yaratacak desenleri ortaya koyabilmek. İkincisi de birbirini tamamlayan renk tonlarıyla tasarımda esneklik yaratabilmek. Bu çalışmaları da yaparken istediğimiz görsel etkiyi desteklemek, onun etkisini arttırmak amacıyla da farklı yüzey alternatiflere ve dokulara da odaklanmış olduk. Bu çalışmaları yaparken tabii ki çok güçlü bir ekiple çok yoğun bir çalışma gerçekleştirdik. Ben herkesin ismini tek tek sayamayacağım ama biraz bölümlerden de bahsetmek istiyorum çünkü gerçekten çok değerli emekleri ve katkıları var ASAŞ ailesindeki iş birimlerimizin. Tasarımlarımızın gerçekleştirildiği bölümümüz, üretim yönetimi, üretim yaptığımız alüminyum yassı mamuller bölümümüz, ürün yönetimi bölümümüz, pazarlama iletişim bölümümüzdeki arkadaşlarla ortak yoğun bir çalışma gerçekleştirdik. Bu renkleri hayata geçirebilmek için. Aynı zamanda ürün geliştirme sürecinde de bize destek olan tedarikçilerimize de çok teşekkür ediyorum. Ben 2021 trend renklerine geçmeden önce biraz şöyle bir açıklama yapmak istiyorum. Ekranda da var zaten. Biz renkleri kısa kısa burada görsellerle anlatmaya çalışacağız ama tabii ki renklere dokunmak, onları hissetmek daha iyi algılamamızı yardımcı olacağını düşünüyorum. Bu anlamda kartelamızı isterseniz bu sunum boyunca chatten iletişim bilgilerinizi yazabilirsiniz. Size kargo ile gönderimini sağlayabiliriz. Aynı zamanda da pazarlama@asastere.com e-posta adresimize iletişim bilgilerinizi gönderirseniz yine kartelamızı size kargo ile ulaştırabiliriz. Daha detaylı da bilgi almak isterseniz ürünlerimizle ilgili bu yeni trend renklerimize özel hazırladığımız mikro web sitemiz olan asastrendrenkler.com web sitemizde ziyaret edebilirsiniz. Ben o zaman kısaca bir geçiş yapayım. Biz 2021 yılı, bir önceki slaytta yine kalabiliriz isterseniz. 2021 yılı trend renklerinde aslında 5 tane konuya odaklanmış olduk. Bunlar zamansız malzemeler dediğimiz, geçmişten gelen, aslında hala günümüzde de önemini ve değerini yitirmemiş olan malzemelerimiz. Yenilikçi soyut desenler dediğimiz, kendimizin tasarladığı bir farklı boyut, bir yenilik getirmeyi amaçladığımız desen çalışmalarımız. Dokulu yüzeyler, prizmatik renkler ve tamamlayıcı renkler de bu çalışmalarla birlikte kullanabileceğimiz alternatif ürünlerimiz olarak grupladık. İsterseniz tekrar detaylara geçebiliriz şimdi. Öncelikle ben beton deseninden bahsetmek istiyorum. Biliyorsunuz aslında beton hem taşıyıcı yapı malzemesi olarak kullanılıyor, hem de uzun yıllardır tematik ve estetik amaçladığı bir kullanımı var. Güçlü ve yalın bir görünümü var. Binalara da ayrı bir kimlik kazandırıyor. Biz de bunu kompozit panelde tekrar nasıl yorumlayabiliriz diye düşündük bu tasarımı yaparken. Bu anlamda da iki farklı yüzey seçeneği çalıştık. Birincisinde zaten aslında görüyorsunuz da üstteki görsel ve alttaki görselde de dokunduğunuzda yüzeyindeki pürüzlülüğü hissedebiliyorsunuz. İkincisinde de görsel olarak da o pürüzlülüğü, o dokuyu algılayabiliyorsunuz. Bu da tasarımdaki vermek istediğiniz etkiye bağlı olarak kullanım seçeneklerinde bir avantaj sunuyor size. Biz dokulu beton desenini kendi içimizde bir çalışmada uyguladık. Gerçekten de çok başarılı oldu. Ben burada sağ tarafta aynı zamanda bu desenlerin nasıl kullanılabildiğine dair de görseller eklemeye çalıştım. Bunlar kartelimizde de var. Beton deseni, dokulu beton desenini burada bizim dinamik çizgiler dediğimiz yine kartelimizde yer alan yenilikçi bir desen çalışmamızda kullanımını görüyoruz. Bir sonraki isterseniz geçebiliriz. Çok teşekkür ederim. Bir diğer zamansız malzemeler dediğimiz aslında ürünümüzde bakır patine ürünümüz. Son dönemde endüstriyel dokunuşların modern malzemelerle tekrar yorumlandığı bina tasarımlarının hayatımıza girdiğini zaten hepimiz biliyoruz, görüyoruz da. Biz de bu anlamda tasarım çalışmalarımızı yaparken oksitlenmiş bakırın o göz alıcı, parlak, estetik, kızıl kahverengi görünümünü nasıl ortaya çıkarabiliriz diye odaklandık. Ve bakır patine rengimizi de bu çalışmayı yaparken özel parlak bir yüzeyle hayata geçirmiş olduk. Burada bakır patine renginin kullanımı ile ilgili de bir görsel çalışması ekledim. Bizim Trend Renkler kartelimizde yer alan mat, soft touch yani yumuşak dokulu yüzeyli olan beyaz rengimizle uyumlu olabileceğini düşünerek burada böyle bir çalışma ekledik. Tabii mimaride yaratılmak istenen etkiye, tasarıma bağlı olarak da bakır patinlerimizi doğal malzemelerle bizim natural bond renk kartelimizdeki ya da trend renk kartelimizdeki ürünlerimizle de kullanabilmek mümkün. Bundan sonraki çalışmamızda da bir sonraki desen çalışmamızda biz aslında zamansız malzeme olarak tanımladığımız beton ve bakır patine dışında kendimiz nasıl farklı desenler, soyut desenler çalışabiliriz diye düşündük. Bir mimaride farklılık yaratmayı hedefledik aynı zamanda. Bu yenilikçi tasarımıyla öne çıkan geometrik desende sunumda da görüyorsunuz zaten farklı boyutlardaki dairesel yapıların bir araya gelerek açıklı, koyulu tonlarda kareler ve dikdörtgenlere dönüştüğünü görüyorsunuz. Hareketli bir tasarımı var bu çalışmamızın. Bu çalışmamızda aynı zamanda bu yüzeydeki benekli efekti de daha ön plana çıkarabilmek için dokulu bir yüzey kullandık. Ben zaten aslında o yüzden karteli mutlaka alın, bakın, dokunun istiyorum. Çünkü burada tabii ki o dokulu yüzeyi görebilmek pek mümkün olmuyor. Küçük bir ekranda ve sadece görsel olarak görmüş olduğumuz için. İki farklı renkte çalıştık biz bu geometrik deseni. Füme ve buz grisi renginde. Ve tasarımda bir esneklik sağlamak adına da bu düz renklerini de karteleye eklemiş olduk alt renk olarak. Mimarlarımız ama isterse tabii ki farklı renklerle de bu deseni kombinleyerek farklı yaratıcı tasarımları da hayata geçirebilir. Bir sonraki tasarımımız da yine bizim soyut, kendimizin tasarladığı, pazara sunduğu dinamik çizgiler. Bu adından da anlaşılacağı üzere farklı ton ve kalınlıklardaki çizgilerin geçişlerindeki estetik uyum ve dinamizm, geçiş dinamizmini yansıtıyor. Burada bir yalın ve akışkan bir form var aslında. Bunu isterseniz yatay formda, yani yatay olarak, isterseniz dikey olarak, yandaki görselde de görüyorsunuz hem yatay uygulaması var hem dikey uygulaması var. Tasarıma özel olarak da istenirse açılı uygulama da, açılı kesim yapılarak da uygulanması mümkün. Bu anlamda da farklı esnek çözümler ve imkanlar, fırsatlar da tanıyor bu ürünümüz. Bu akışkan yapıyı da daha çok öne çıkarabilmek için de yüzeyde, geometrikte mesela daha pütürtülü bir yüzey seçmiştik. Burada da daha yumuşak, daha soft bir yüzeyi tasarımımıza eklemiş olduk bitiş olarak. Aynı zamanda burada füme ve buz grisi rengine ek olarak da kum rengini ekledik. Tasarımda bir farklılaşma isteyenlerin, daha böyle krem renklere gitmek isteyenler için de bir alternatif olması açısından. Ben aslında sunumun başında da belirtmiştim, biliyorsunuz. Biz dokulara da çok odaklandık, yüzeylere de odaklandık. Çünkü bunun mimaride, tasarımda etkiyi farklılaştırdığını düşünüyoruz. Alanları bölmede de fırsatlar yarattığını düşünüyoruz. Burada aslında iki farklı dokuyu görüyoruz. Festival ve gün batımı dediğimiz bu sıcak tonlarda daha ince pürüzlü bir doku var. Dokulu antrasit dediğimizde de daha deriyi andıran bir yüzey görünümü var. Burada da amacımız tasarımlarında farklılık arayan, belli bölgeleri bölmek isteyen, özelleştirmek isteyen, farklı etkiler yaratmak isteyen tasarımcılarımıza, mimarlarımıza olanaklar sunmak, onların tasarımlarına katkı sağlamak. Burada ben biraz böyle geçiyorum, akışkan bir şekilde geçiyorum Emre Bey.
Yok, harika gidiyor. Yani tabii orada söylemek istediğim tek şey, hani malzemeleriniz alüminyum olsa bile gerçekten etkisini maksimumda kullanmak için çalıştığınız ve ne kadar ileri düzey teknolojilerle üretim yaptığınız belli. Teşekkür ediyoruz bütün bilgiler için tabii ki.
Çok teşekkür ederim, çok sağ olun. Bu prizmatik, aslında bizim her rengimizin bir mottosu var. Kartelimizde de yer alıyor. Kartelimiz alanlar göreceklerdir. Prizmatik renklerde de sofistike renkler, etkileyici tasarımlar diye. Neden sofistike renkler dedik? Çünkü bu prizmatik renklerde bina cephesine uyguladığımız zaman güneşin geldiği açıya ya da sizin baktığınız açıya göre paneli farklı renklerde görebiliyorsunuz. Bu da yapıya ayrı bir dinamizm, ayrı bir farklılık katıyor. Biz burada özellikle iki renk çalıştık. Daha yalın tasarım, bina tasarımı yapmak isteyenler için kiraz çiçeği, böyle eflatundan böyle yeşile dönen bir rengi var. Zaten burada yandaki örnek görsel uygulamasında da ekinoks rengini görüyoruz. Bir de daha çarpıcı, yaratıcı, farklılaşmak isteyen tasarımlar için mor rengin de asaletini yansıtan prizmatik yine ekinoks rengimizi de kartelamıza ekledik. Burada aslında farklı ve şaşırtan tasarımlar için bir opsiyon sunmayı da amaçlamış olduk prizmatik renklerde.
Ya farklı perspektife göre farklı sonuçlar veren ürünler.
Aynen öyle. Burada bir de kartelimizde yer alan son ürün grubumuz nude renkler. Aslında biliyorsunuz nude renkler ten renkleri diye geçer. Biz de binanın teninin rengini tasarlamaya çalıştık. Ben öyle söyleyeyim. Tamamlayıcı renkler aynı zamanda bizim için nude renkler. Karteladaki diğer desenlerle ve renklerle de birlikte kullanım imkanı var. Aynı zamanda bu 6 tonun hepsi kendi içinde de uyumlu renkler olduğu için farklı karalaş tasarımlarıyla farklı desenler yaratabilme imkanı da sunmayı hedefledik. Biz bu yandaki binada her bir basamağa farklı renk verdik ama bir cephe üzerinde farklı karalajlarla farklı desenleri de bu renklerle sağlamak mümkün. Bu renklerimizde biz özellikle mat, yumuşak kadifemsi bir dokunuşu olan soft touch yüzeyi tercih ettik ki birlikte kullandığı renkleri daha çok öne çıkarsın. Birlikte de daha uyumlu ve mimari tasarımda istenen etkiyi verecek tasarımların yapılmasına da hizmet etsin diye. Biz burada da sade ve iddialı tasarımlar diye bu renk içinde mottomuzu belirlemiş olduk. Benim aslında şu an anlatacaklarım renklere dair bu kadar. Sizin de Adam'la birlikte güzel sohbetinize başlamak için daha fazla da uzatmak istemiyorum. Ama son kez tekrar hatırlatmak istiyorum. Bizim prizmatik renkler olsun, nude renkler olsun, kartelimizde yer alan dinamik çizgiler, geometrik desen olsun, farklı desen çalışmalarımızı görmek için lütfen kartelimizi isteyin. Onun için web sitemizi ziyaret edebilirsiniz ya da chat bölümünden bize yazabilirsiniz şu anda. Eğer webinardan sonra talep edecekseniz de e-posta adresimiz var herhalde şu anda. Ekranda da gelir birazdan. Oradan da bize ulaşabilirsiniz.
Teşekkür ediyoruz verdiğiniz bilgiler için Demet Hanım. Demet Hanım'ın da söylediği gibi sormak istediğiniz sorular varsa lütfen paylaşın. Sorularınızın cevaplarını size ulaştırmaya çalışacağız her şekilde. Demet Hanım da size vereceği ve paylaşacağı kanallar yoluyla istediğiniz zaman da ulaşmaya devam edebilirsiniz. Teşekkür ediyoruz sunumunuz için Demet Hanım.
Çok sağ olun. Ben teşekkür ederim.
Rica ederim. Şu anda Adam bağlanacak tabii ki ve kendisiyle beraber size bir konuşma gerçekleştireceğiz. Hi Adam, welcome first of all.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation, Emre.
No worries. It's our honor actually to entertain you here. First of all, actually, I would like to present my feelings and then share the fact that I'm trying to humbly present Nurgül Yardım Meriçliler, the Enilab podcast founder here, with the support of Arkitera family and ASAŞ Alüminyum family. And today, as you all know, and we also closely follow our guest, Adam Nathaniel Furman. He is artist and designer, but also he has worked on a lot of different scale with a lot of different color and textures. Like this is the foundation of his research and offices. But of course, as a millennial, I can say maybe that he's quite multitasking as well. So can you give us a little bit of your background and how your journey started? We all know that you started in CSM, but could you please give us a little bit of hint how you started and how it's evolved?
So yeah, I'm what they call apparently a geriatric millennial now, which is the very first year that can be called millennial, which I think is 1982. So I'm on the older edge of that, and I began at Central St. Martin's initially wanting to go into fine art. So actually, I from high school was very interested in painting and drawing, and I kind of was, always producing very large amounts of visual material. So not necessarily spatial. And in Central St. Martin's, they have a foundation course, which is in Britain, it's a very common thing where you don't necessarily know exactly which category of the creative arts you're going to go into. And you have a year where you try many, many, many different things. And for the final term, so for the last third of the year, you pick one area which you kind of get to know much more about. And I ended up in spatial design, which is kind of interior design, interior architecture, decorating and architecture. Mm-hmm. And had a fantastic teacher who convinced me to go into architecture, because it was something that I was always interested in. And she sort of mentored me, took me by the hand, and I applied and got into the Architectural Association, which was very surprising, considering I thought, it's such such a famous school. I'm not gonna get into it. But actually, back then, it's different now. But back then, it was a very independent, small school, and they didn't have any entrance criteria for British students. So they basically, you didn't have to have any grades. It all depended on the interview, and if they found you fascinating and you had a lot of really interesting work on the interview, they would take you regardless of your grades. There's your boss, Patrick Schumacher. And I turned up and I didn't have any grades. I was kicked out of high school, but I turned up with just this huge quantity of drawings and paintings and models and sculptures, and they were like, "You're in." And so then I had this sort of amazing journey through the Architectural Association, with a lot of depressing people like your boss, but also lots of cool people who were doing interesting things that weren't just like playing with Grasshopper, which didn't exist back then, but playing with parameters and Rhino curves. And through that journey of I discovered, I guess, that there is a space within architecture which is liminal. It's in the gaps between different professions. And when I graduated, already through university, I discovered a passionate interest, I already had an interest from when I was a teenager in color, in representation, in identity expressed in a visual manner in a spatial way, spatially, which hinged on color, ornamentation, and decoration. And that was something that I really pushed when I was a student, when nobody in frankly, nobody in London was doing it. And went through school kind of, I guess, being very antagonistic and fighting against your boss and his acolytes, who, you know, there was a kind of dictum back then that architecture was about embodying a new era of technology, and in order to represent technology you had to look in a particular way because that particular way embodied technology, which embodied the current state of the world, which it was a kind of circular argument that kind of defined itself and argued for itself, but there wasn't really any basis for it. And obviously as a queer person with a sort of multi-ethnic background coming in, I didn't feel like I fit into that. And so I was arguing all the time my case, very forcefully, and it set me up very well for going into the outside world, where when I graduated, I wanted to produce work that was visually and aesthetically very, very different and embodied what I considered alternative forms of identity. And architects, sorry,
go on, please. No, I was just going to say that, I mean, it's so obvious and interesting as well to see the work of the examples of your work that also proves that not necessarily the technology or the improvements of the computational approaches like is the key factor of the design or architecture. It's quite bigger than that, actually. So that's
yeah, so I guess one of the ways that I managed to survive through university and then afterwards was by taking issues that architects and people in the world were obsessed with. And then I guess you can use the term queering them, but I guess it's coming at them from a very different angle. So, for instance, the reason I managed to get honors at the AA and I won the AA prize and I won the Reba Bronze commendation, I basically won everything, like all the way through the school. Most of the teachers, they like hated my work, but I did all of the box ticking. So I did everything. They were interested in technology. I did it better than them. I did, you know, they were interested in 3D printing. I did it better than everyone else. You know, they were interested in structural performance of different materials. I did it better than everyone else. And then I added on top of that all of my interests. So it was kind of like taking what the architects valued, doing it in a way that they could not critique the quality, but then adding all of my interest for color, representation, identity, history kind of folded into it, but in such a way that they couldn't reject it because the fundamentals were there. So for instance, you see here 3D printing. I was using 3D printing, yes, for ornamentation and for decoration, but I was also assembling it and I was also using it as a form of structural experimentation, which was done afterwards, but I was the first one at the AA to be doing that. And you know, so the technical department really liked it, but then also I could talk about it in terms of relationship to the program and development of the project for my interest.
Yeah, I mean, also like the patterns and the colors and everything you are reflecting on your projects, like they have often pattern-rich aesthetics carries. And in your own words, actually, you said, I bring equal parts pleasure, color, and joy. So then that to everything you feel lucky enough to be involved every time in every project that you take a step. So could you please also a bit tell us about the process you're being part of and then behind of your projects in your own office as well? Did you carry the same things from school that you have done follow? Also, how did those approaches you carried in AA evolved in your office?
Yeah, I mean, so it's been very consistent in terms of a development. I mean, the interest when I was a teenager, I was, I guess, quite radical. And I was part of kind of underground scenes in London, and visual culture was a very important part of that, politically, but also just for fun and aesthetically. Then through university, I was pushing all of those issues, and they combined with architectural questions, materials. So you see here, there's a sort of structural exploration of stone vaulting, using 5-axis machines and robotic arms, which, you know, it's a long time ago. And then when I went out into the sort of world, I continued wanting to explore those issues and those questions. But my generation, the millennials, were not interested in anything. Like I couldn't find anyone in the architecture world who were interested in the same questions. So, you know, there were lots of other people who were teaming up in groups to pursue their own objectives and, you know, in collectives. And I just couldn't find anyone. So I kind of had to find my own ways. And it was a matter of finding bursary opportunities for institutional support, so residency programs. And actually the reason I ended up going back into art was because the artistic world and the design world is a lot more open to very, very radically different discussions, which were related to identity and the things that I was interested in. I think now architecture is finally starting to be interested in these questions, but back then it was mostly in the art world. And so I got residencies and I got support from institutions like the Design Museum, the British Academy.
Oh, that's cool.
And through those opportunities, and then the Sir John Soanes Museum, I managed to get myself the support to be able to produce projects which showed all of my ideas, which explored materiality, color, ornament, history, queerness, and the theory of all of that in a way that I wanted to do, but also creating material results, and also allowed me a platform to bypass the world of architectural criticism and architectural journalism and actually reach a much, much broader audience. And it helped me to launch my career because it kind of gave me a name. Like I was interviewed on the BBC and it went all over the world, and then ITV, and it just allowed me to, especially with the use of social media, to kind of create an audience and create a group of clients, which I wouldn't have been able to do if I'd just been moving through the architecture world. But the whole time I was still working in architecture as well at the same time. And it's the same. So it's the same issues of identity, materiality in relation to color, ornamentation, that I continued through from teenagehood through to architecture school and then into my career afterwards. And I've just had to find slightly different routes, I guess, to other people of how to get commissions. The picture on screen is a course I taught at the Architectural Association in 2010, which was to make one-to-one ceramic walls. So the students produced from scratch. They designed, then they made the molds, then they cast, then they fired, then they made the glaze, then they fired again, and then they assembled one-to-one architectural rain screen facades in ceramics. So I've kind of been really, really interested in materiality, but not in that sort of Patrick Schumacher click a button sort of way.
Yeah,
I'm not going to stop with this. I'm just doing it to annoy you.
Yeah, I really understand. I got the hint. So
I'm being very English. I'm joshing you.
No, it's okay. You can. Actually, that's also a good thing that you're being a bridge between the Argentinian and Japanese culture. That you are also sort of an experimental project all by yourself. So I guess so that trying to combine architecture with something else. Actually, this has been, I guess, waiting maybe for a long time. Like this sort of there's been a stuck along the way, and seeing the results are so amazing. And how do you also see the effect of attaching and being part of different cultures? And also you had many projects on different countries and continents as well. I'm sure that those must be having a lot of additional evolution in the projects and then on your step. But how could you express it in a way?
Well, I think you can probably. I think you can probably see from my work that that's a very big part of why I wanted to do work that was was kind of expressive, and why I talk about identity and I talk about culture. So especially in terms of ornament and color, I do talk about cultural kind of mixing and the translation between different cultures a lot, and that being a positive thing. So I guess there's a lot of discussion these days about. When it comes to identity, which is kind of something that's on everyone's tongues, especially in the UK, there is a lot of discussion about the local and being rooted and being part of a community and everything being very specific. So you're from one place. That one place matters. The history of that one place matters. Your identity is tied to that. And, the people on the right of the British community or the British public, they tend to think British nationalism, which is, it's fine. But then on the left, it's kind of the same thing, but they say like local, contextual, and it's more like a lovey-dovey soft version, but it's actually in the end, it's the same thing. It's a kind of celebration of the rooted and the local. And being from a background, which is a mess. I mean, it's not just Japan and Argentina. I mean, my parents are also from rootless backgrounds. Like Theresa May, our previous prime minister, she said, if someone calls themselves a citizen of the world, it means they're a citizen of nowhere, which is a very strong sentiment around the world at the moment. And I'm someone who doesn't have roots. And I don't have an identity that's clearly fixed. And actually, my identity is constantly changing. It's very uncertain. There's a lot of loss. There's a lot of tragedy. There's a lot of trauma. But there's a lot of joy. But it's not specific to particular places. It's a kind of moving, constant creation of identity from place to place through the generations. And that meant that I was always feeling like, I guess, not fitting in, but at the same time also positive, because it meant that my life also culturally is between categories. And then also being queer means that I'm between categories. So that's a really positive thing that I see, that cultures can be mixed together to create new forms of identity. I guess it's kind of like an ultra version of multiculturalism, or like a hyper-speed version of what happens in reality anyway. I mean, you have, what I love about ornament is that you have motifs, ornamental motifs, and they move between cultures and countries constantly. There's no motif that belongs to one country, truly. You know, you look at paisley, and it moved from Kashmir through Iran all over the world very quickly, and it's sort of the national pattern of several countries. And you look at ornamentation that began in the Roman Empire with these kind of acanthus complex motifs that then became knot motifs in the Celtic culture, and then Islamic culture. They became kind of very complicated spiral motifs, which then moved to China and became part of the Rococo, and then that became part of Chinese decorative culture, which then came back to Europe with Rococo 1,000 years later. And so there's a kind of wonderful fluidity that happens there, a bit like with food. And that's exactly what I try to capture. It's the kind of movement of identity through visual culture, but not meaning that you're not part of nowhere, but meaning that each point of that, every project, is a joyful identity created at one moment in time through a mixture of different things. And it's kind of celebrating that rooting, I guess. It's like creating a rooting in each project. It's creating a rooting in each moment of your life. And it's kind of what my family have done basically through their history. And it's what my parents did when they came to London.
Yes,
and it's what I try to do with my work.
Yeah, sort of you are trying to appreciate the origins of the material or the product or the pattern itself. It speaks through the overall context or the composition that you create, basically, I guess. Yeah, in dialogue with each other, in the kind of combination that they have in the particular object or project. Exactly. So in terms of the colors and materiality, I mean, I know that you have also bigger scale projects like the Glasgow Town Hall project. So how architecture should celebrate the colors and materiality? How do you think about it? So, I mean, the color is. I think rather than saying that color is important, I think we're in a very strange situation where for the first time in history, color is something unusual. And actually, throughout most of history, in most cultures, wherever there was any wealth, wherever there was any sort of excess money, ornamentation and color were a given. It was simply what you did because you wanted to express things and you wanted to incorporate decorative art into your architecture. And it's only really very recently, and I would say in the sort of last 30 or 40 years, that color has been sort of systematically kind of carved out of the way we think of space. It's become something unusual to add. So I would say that for me, it's a matter of continuity, because as humans, we express ourselves in the spaces around us, and we do that with all means at our disposal. And we do that with dyes, with fabrics, we do that with jewelry, we do that with paintings, we do that with ornamentation on our buildings. And it's always been the case. So I think it's very unusual that's sort of been carved out of design over the past 30 or 40 years. And I do want it to come back. And I think also it's an interesting moment because technologically, I mean, the lady who was presenting the different aluminium panels was showing one of the areas where technology is now much more able to provide than it was over the last maybe 60 years, polychromatic options for architects to incorporate into their buildings. So I think on the one hand, we've had a period without it, which is unusual. And I think on the other hand, we're moving into a period which technologically is allowing for it to happen and being used by architects in really interesting ways. And obviously in my practice, I explore very specific types of technology related mostly to ceramics. But there's a lot of other options out there available. And I think it's something that should always be there in the public realm. Yeah, I guess the Abet Laminati also commissioned a couple of your projects as well in terms of material test. Yeah, I mean, it's quite fascinating and interesting, actually, like having this dialogue and all sort of, maybe, I don't know whether it's true or not to say that turning a monologue into a catalog in when you were just exactly creating a medium for the audience when they face with your products or your the different scale products, let's say, they start to understand and criticize, as you said, that colors now doesn't mean just one thing or necessarily doesn't express one thing. So it creates more than that, actually. It's just not color anymore. It's defying the boundaries, and then it creates something else. So also like in many interviews that you had, that the role of the facades in the 21st century is like, also you have a couple of projects. One is Croydon, look down to look up, I guess. So they create a sort of medium for people to understand that, to change their daily habit as well. So how do you see the strength and the effect of the facade and outside of the buildings or the space? Let's say.
I mean, I see facades as very important because I think it's a little bit like clothing. The clothing is extremely, it's like what you eat. Religions control what you eat, okay, because it's the most fundamental way of controlling the systems of the body. And clothing, similarly, is very important to talk about who you are, what's your identity, what's important to you. Do you wear suits? What kind of suits do you wear? Are you, what crowd are you part of? It really does express who you are. And similarly, buildings do that for human culture, basically. Okay, so it's like the ultimate. Hannah Arendt, when she was talking about the Greek city, she was talking specifically about the kind of period of construction of the Parthenon in Athens, and she was talking about how the city was the register, the physical register of everything that was considered successful or valuable in the culture of Athens at the time. And when somebody was very successful, they put up a statue. When someone was something very important happened by the city, they would build a small temple. And everything had meaning in relation to the value of the culture of the time, and also the way that it was designed would embody that value. And cities do that. No matter what you do, they embody the value of what is valued. I mean, the discussions in Istanbul, there was a lot of discussions about putting up the shopping center, I think, in that square. And these things are very powerful, and the way that they look embodies that. And so the way I like to think within, at least here in terms of the context of a liberal democracy, is that the city is the symbolic parliament. It's the symbolic space that shows what is ultimately valued. And therefore, the facades, it's very important that they do have a level of expression and diversity that represents what's going on in the broader culture of a country at a particular time. And so I push very hard, and I sort of argue very hard, that this sort of domination of one particular aesthetic that all architects and planners follow at one period in time can be very damaging for society in terms of how it can express itself. So I really push for a diversity of expression, specifically and especially on facades, because of their public physical presence. It's clothing for society in a permanent manner.
That's great. Also, you are co-runner of Saturated Space at AA. So in terms of some influential research and experiment, maybe the colors, with your colleague, Antoni Malinowski, if I pronounce correct.
You did.
So it's a sort of research group color in urbanism and architecture, in a way, that when we were talking about the expressions of the facade. So do you also try to narrate the same things, even if it could be different scales, in terms of this urbanism to architecture? Like, how do you explore the color in there?
So, I mean, Saturated Space is a platform. So, I mean, it's a research group which, we put many symposiums together. So we had many lecture series. We had one in the Biennale. We had one in Cambridge. We had one in Milan. We had several at the AA. We've had a lot of events where there's several speakers, and the idea is, and we've also published. So like we've had a continuous process of publishing academic texts, and the idea is to open up the discussion. So it's not how I relate to color; it's opening up the discussion for many different practitioners to have time and space to think about what color is and how they use it and to write about it. And it's because I think having a language, a way of talking about something, means that something can become taken more seriously, can be taken more seriously, and can get more depth if you have a language to talk about it. And that's what saturated space has been about, and it's been very helpful. Also on the one hand, having a language, but also pinpointing areas where color actually has a really powerful effect. So cultural questions, political questions, architectural questions, and bringing that out so people can start to realize it's not just a silly superficial thing. It's actually a very powerful area of human of human creation, and it has a lot of meaning to it. I would recommend to everyone to visit the website. There's a lot of excellent essays by a lot of excellent academics. Now, how does that feed into my work? Not necessarily directly, but my work has always been an exploration of those questions. I mean, there's a reason that I set up Saturated Space. It was because I wanted people to be able to, or I wanted to be able to talk to people in a way that would not undermine my work. So I like to talk about the questions of color. I like to talk about the questions of ornament in relation to politics, in relation to identity, in relation to material culture, and not be laughed at. And really, it was actually a way of creating a forum that made it serious, that gave it gravity. So that, I mean, yes, there's plenty of people who see my work and they go, oh, it's just stupid, it's just ridiculous, you know. And there's a lot of grumpy old architects do that. A lot of young architects do that. A lot of millennials do that. But I know for certain that there's a huge amount of research and there's a lot of depth to what I do. So at least I can be confident in it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in terms of being quite serious and critical about and introducing it on the political side, it also like gives me the sense of that you could be a millennial, but also you have this strength that like the generations that even if that could be accepted by the majority, still they have a courage to say that no, this is total nonsense. So that's, I believe that this is an amazing thing, because at the end, the design and what we do is the part of questioning mostly, because the space is not only just the four walls and the roof and floor anymore. Like this is more than that, and we are trying to understand the psychology on it. Like it's architecture sort of behaves mutual point of everything. It's the intersection of everything. So in your project, like this is so obvious that we could see it. And also regarding those, like, could you tell us a little bit about your proposal of this liberal archive in case that the connections of everything?
Well, I mean, the Liberal Archive is part of a series of projects, I guess. Imaginary, I guess, projects, speculative projects that are about monumentality. So, but a different kind of monumentality. So I feel that because I'm a liberal, and for me, diversity is extremely important. But in a kind of deep sense of that word, and I could talk about it in many different ways and in a lot of depth, but diversity is important, but I think also a sense of collectivity is just as important. And it's, I think, the idea of feeling together while also being diverse is really important. And this is something I felt for many years, especially as someone who's never been part of a community, because my identity means I'm frankly outside of all communities. I've felt outside, and individuality is important, and being able to do your own thing is important, but also I've always wanted to feel part of something bigger, which allows for that. And that liberalism should cater for that, right? It should create institutions that we all look up to. And that's kind of been falling apart in the past 5 years a lot. And I think representation of collectivity is extremely important to feel a sense of belonging. And, you know, I think one of the great reasons that the European Union is highly problematic, and one of the many reasons I think that the UK left is it's, you know, the word people use a lot for it is faceless. You know, Brussels is a bunch of, you know, developer built office buildings. There's like no sense of accountability symbolically. The buildings there's a parliament in Strasbourg, there's a parliament in Brussels. There's no piazza out front. No, there's no image of them that people can think of. You know, there's no presidential palace. There's no Westminster Hall, and that's something that makes it very faceless and distant and abstract, which is a problem with globalization. And there's a great tradition in most countries of either the church, the local church, or the local town hall, where there was a kind of a level of power which you could relate to in a context that was symbolically important, where you could protest, but you could also go to celebrate. And it was something that you could hate, it was something that you could love, but it was embodied and it was near you. And we have a fantastic tradition of town halls here in the UK that did that. And we don't have that anymore. I think that any idea of civic embodiment in the UK has disappeared. It's all innocuous rented office buildings that councils now exist in. And there's a real disassociation between the public and power. And so I wanted to do these projects that talk about symbolically, what could it be like if we went back to creating symbols that were powerful, but also embodied a different idea of the state that's not necessarily this sort of totalized, powerful unity, but is actually something that we can all relate to, that's diverse, that's inclusive, that's a bit messy, but nonetheless has a strong image that we can look up to. And so I was looking back to the cathedrals of the past, where things were built incrementally, things added over time, but thinking of all the amazing technologies that we have nowadays, the material technologies, also all of the incredible creative talent that we have, and thinking about how we can make national buildings and monuments which can accumulate and accommodate many different types of expressions over time. So also different political organizations will be running the city, and they'll add their thing, but then a right-wing one will come in, and then they'll add their thing, but then all the contradictions would be contained within these buildings. And effectively, in different ways, that's what the Democratic Monument and the Liberal Archive are doing, but in an expressly aesthetic manner. So it's sort of presenting an idea visually, symbolically, for that idea of relating to power. And it's a very different idea too. I saw Erdogan, your friend, name friend, built the presidential palace, which is unusual because people don't normally these days they try and hide power, and it's sort of that impetus, that idea to build something, but then turning into something that is one that everyone can feel part of, literally in a way, actually have a part in making it.
Yeah.
We haven't built any major civic buildings in this country like in 100 years.
Exactly. Even that was a bit of interesting topic for us as well. Like literally creating a symbol of strength and power and expressing many things in this.
Yeah, of course. And it's a conversation to be had. But it's a good conversation. I don't think it's like either or. I think it's also a question of what kind of power. And also when political regimes change, sometimes it's actually quite nice to then modify symbols of power. But I think that those symbols are really important. And if you're a society that has stopped building them, I think there's a serious problem there. And I think Brexit and all of that is part of our inability to think of ourselves as a collective here in the UK anyway at the moment. But I think it's a problem that in a lot of the West is present.
No, I totally agree with you. Because at the end, we need to create some sort of image, even if it's stable or not, that we need to encourage the motivation of conversation. So either denial or acceptance, it could be, or reflecting amnesia or remembrance. I don't know.
Either way, at least it starts a conversation.
Yeah, at least it can trigger something. So
yeah.
in this way, I believe that every attempt is a good thing. So also, you just in terms of combining and creating a common point for different things and then showing the common points of this. In 2017, you had a pavilion in front of St. Martin, the gateways. Also, it has the same thing, same samples on it, and then same expressions that you carry, I believe. Could you also give something about the gateways and how people use it? How was their reactions to that?
Oh, it was the most photographed installation in the history of London Design Festival. They loved it. People were fighting over because they wanted to film themselves walking up and down. They were fighting each other. It was quite funny. And there was one lady who kept going up and down, and people were like, "Go away!" So that was for Turkish ceramics, which is, I'm sure you know, or maybe you don't. It's it's a sort of industrial collaboration of different Turkish ceramic manufacturers to help advertise their wares all over the world. very successful in the UK, very present. Turkish ceramic products are actually now used like by all architects here because it's just been very successful. And there was a competition that Turkish Ceramics did for this site, and it was just perfect because I absolutely am obsessed with ceramics. And you know, Turkey is one of the great countries that has done architectural ceramics. So I was like, hell yeah, and got very, very excited. And so there's kind of two different sides to this. On the one hand, there's the creation of an installation which works in that space. And I sort of did it like a sort of enfilade and used very simply different geometric forms in a kind of Baroque way to draw people through and just in perspective to create a kind of very dynamic effect. And that's kind of how I like to work. So I like to create things that are material, that are static. I don't like you know, projections and moving things. I like things to be simple, static, and to work in terms of just you moving around them or sitting on them or looking at them. And this worked brilliantly in that respect. It really pulled people through. From the side, people were attracted to it. People were hiding, standing on the ledges, taking pictures of themselves. People would go through, the kids would run around it. It worked very well as a kind of monumental symbolic moment in the city, super popular. And it ties back to history in a way that I always like to do. So it's kind of, I guess, democratizing monumentality in a way that I was just talking about with much bigger scale things. It's, you know, the history of ceramics goes back forever, you know, but, you know, I don't know, 5,000 years ago, I don't know, I think it's 3,000 years ago, you have the gates of Ishtar in Babylon, which obviously still survived to a certain degree. But you have monumental architecture being created in ceramics from the Middle East, from the beginning of human civilization. And every major civilization used it. And I kind of used Turkish history as an excuse to talk about this amazing cross-cultural history, you know, from Iran through to the United Kingdom, Turkey, China, everywhere. There's this amazing ceramic tradition. And I like to say that now we have industrially produced ceramics. We have these tiles, but don't think of them as cheap, right? Think of them actually as these amazing pieces of history. It's a little bit like thinking of yourself as stardust. Yeah, you're human, yes, but you're made of stardust, you know? And it's like, yes, these are just ceramics, but they are part of this incredible human tradition that goes back to the very beginning of time. And each one of the elevations is a kind of celebration in my head of a different period of ceramic production, but using commercial products, except for the first one where I worked with the ISNIC. Is it ISNIC? ISNIC Foundation to produce. Basically, I was pushing because it's like my dream to work with the ISNIC Foundation. Like, oh my God, the way that they still produce things the way that they were produced 500 years ago. And we did this together, and it was honestly still probably the best moment of my professional career, being able to design that with the ISNIC Foundation. I mean, you should have seen me when the installation was there in London. Like, I basically had my face on that elevation for like a week.
Loving the baby.
Oh,
it's just, well, it's not the tiles. I mean, the way that they paint and layer the glaze, and it's just there. To be honest, these days you don't really get that kind of quality anymore. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of democratizing monumentality, using new technology, telling narratives about history, but in a very, very easily accessible way that's quite colorful and fun, that interacts with the public realm. It's kind of an embodiment of what I like to do in my work.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's a shame on me. I cannot remember the name of the scientist, but also he says that we are made up of something that we don't know, and we consider it as magic, as you said, stardust. So yeah, I mean, this is amazing that to see that and to utilize from something that we awfully overlook. And then we just say that this is quite ancient, but in a bad way, not accepting this as a really innovation of its time. And then we're just pushing it behind. But yet in your products and the installations, this is amazing to see this progress and everything. And
yeah. And by the way, I'm very keen to work with more Turkish companies. Like really,
sure they are also so keen to work with you as well.
Because the ceramic industry it's very sad to see in the United Kingdom how it struggled. And it's just very nice to see a country like Turkey where the industry is still doing very well. It's really good that, you know, because China has not killed everything.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like in overall way, what is your ultimate goal at the end? That do you have something in your mind that to saying to yourself that I'm trying to reach that point? Something is really forcing you, or you have something that to expand boundaries again, to break the rules, something sort of fight.
I never intentionally broke the rules, and I never intentionally caused a fuss. I get a lot of aggression of people saying like, oh, I asked for drama. No, I actually just always did what I wanted to do, and it's just because of passion. I really do like the things that I do, and I don't do them to cause shock. I do them because I really believe in them, and I really care about them. And in terms of where I want to go, it's quite boring, but I just want to make so I want to create some architecture, maybe with architects, but I want to create things which are about beautiful materials, which are sophisticated. They do have an ornamental effect. They have a color to them, but they are integrated with the architecture. They're integrated into our public spaces. So at the moment, I'm used a lot for temporary things, and I really don't like it because, either there's very little budget and I have to use cheap things like vinyl, which is fine, but it's artificial. It's very shiny. I want to be working with ISNIC. I want to be working with craftspeople, with industries that are making amazing things with amazing processes and amazing machines that last permanently. Nothing is permanent, okay, but like that have a presence in space in our cities that last a lot longer. And that's what I really want to do. But when you have a career like mine, when you're doing things that are very, very different, things either take time or never happen, or they really take a lot of time. So it's what I'm working towards. But who knows if that will happen.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's our time of identity and choices. So
yeah, I mean, it is also a function of our generation. I was having dinner with Will Alsop before he passed away. Amazing architect, wonderful man. Also, he was asking me, how old are you? And I was telling him, he's like, oh, you're quite old. And he's like, when I was 20, I'd already won second place in the competition for the Pompidou, or he was like 24 or something. And then he's like, when I was 28, 29, I was building. I had an office. I was just, people would just pick up the phone and I would do with developers. And he was just saying that how sad it was that he would see the new generations. It doesn't happen. We can reach 50 and we're still sort of like emerging.
Exactly.
The whole industry is the whole world, frankly, is geared towards continuity with the older generation who live a lot longer, which is fantastic. I want my parents to live forever, but it also means that opportunity doesn't arise. The handover to new generations doesn't happen. And for someone like me who's doing things which a lot of people dislike, which are very unusual, I need there to be a lot of work going to younger people, because I'm not even young anymore, in order to get some of it. And it doesn't happen these days. So
yeah, I guess in terms of those trying to find the chances and opportunities within these hard times, let's say, do you have any advices or some ideas for the architects for the sake of their job, or I don't know, for their ideology maybe?
Sorry, I lost you there.
I know, it's all right.
You mean in terms of getting work?
Yeah. On architectural level, in terms of
Well, I mean, it's an art, and there are people who are good at it. And I think having work which is very different and unusual is a barrier. It does make it a lot more difficult to get work. But I mean, I'm sure it'll happen eventually. And I mean, the biggest skill that you can have is to be a fantastic networker and to get to know people. Because one thing I've discovered in life, also from friends who are doing very well, is that people tend to go by word of mouth. Commissioners, developers. It's if someone recommends someone to them, it means a lot more than an email out of the blue, or it means a lot more than reading something in a magazine. And so being out there and meeting people and actually making connections seems to be the most important way of actually getting work.
Also, I guess we have a question for you that generally, which materials do you prefer to use? Like, is there any favorite of yours?
Ceramic.
Nothing competes with ceramic, I guess.
No, sorry. I mean, I'm completely obsessed with ceramic. I mean, I'm sorry. Yeah, I love it. I think it's, and I've never been to Turkey and I've never been to Iran. And those are two of it's my dream to go to both of those countries because like in my head, it's like this paradise of old architecture with ceramics. It's the most ancient of building materials, together with mud. And it's miraculous what you can do with it. You can do almost anything with it. But to be honest, I like all materials. As I enjoy working with every material, but at every opportunity, I push to work with ceramics, which are, there's a lot of difficulty and complexity working with them, but it's worth it in the end result that you can get.
And I can also see the proof of your works, so in a way that maximizing the potential of it.
Yeah.
So I guess we completed 1 hour, and then we made you already so tired about explaining everything.
No, it's fine. I'm very happy.
It was really amazing to have the insights of you and then the backgrounds of your company. How do you do it? And also to showing that having liberal and then giving the ideas without accepting all the mod ideas and everything else, like trying to find the roots or exactly the creating not only your identity or only the joy of reflecting it to object, but also trying to reach the very core of it and then giving and making it earn an identity all by itself. So thank you so much for everything.
Thank you so much for the invitation and for at such late notice taking over. It's very kind of you.
I know it's an honor for me. Actually, I really enjoyed, and I hope that everyone also enjoyed as well. And I'm sure that they enjoyed, but yeah.
Who knows? I can't see them.
Yeah, exactly. It's also hard to make everyone happy. But anyway, I'm sure that everyone will see something in every project and everything you share, and also your ideas, of course. All the things that you explained and expressed. And I'm sure that they can take as a lead, and then they can try to establish what they really want. I think this is the most important thing, that reflecting who you are or creating it. So thank you for being an example. And
I want to see some 21st century ceramics in architecture in Istanbul.
Oh, yeah,
I'm very excited to see that happening.
Yeah, we often discuss it about this with Nurgül as well, but hopefully maybe we can do something.
I really want to see it. It's just, you have the most amazing craft tradition there that's still alive. Use it.
Exactly. Hope we can. Okay, and thank you so much for everything. So I wish you a happy weekend already.
You too. Mine is going to be a working weekend. I have.
I'm expecting to see your next exhibition. Or
I have. It's the 10-meter high pyramid, which is going up next week.
Next week. Cool. I will definitely visit that.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, Adam. Bye.